He never cared about his maid, until a simple dinner at her house changed his life forever. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the pristine marble foyer of David Wellington's Manhattan penthouse. At 32, he commanded a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. Yet, as he stepped into his sterile sanctuary, the familiar weight of loneliness settled on his shoulders like an expensive coat that never quite fit right. "Good evening, Mr. Wellington," came a soft voice from the kitchen doorway. David barely glanced up from his phone. Lisa Johnson stood there in her crisp uniform, holding a silver tray with his usual evening scotch. 3 years she'd worked for him, and he knew nothing about her except that she was efficient, quiet, and somehow always anticipated his needs before he voiced them. "Thanks," he muttered, accepting the glass without looking at her face. His fingers brushed hers briefly, warm, calloused from work, but he pulled away quickly, uncomfortable with any human connection that felt too real. Lisa's dark eyes followed him as he moved toward his study, her expression unreadable. She'd learned long ago not to expect acknowledgement beyond the bare minimum. To David Wellington, she was furniture that happened to breathe. "Will you be dining in tonight, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying the slightest hint of her southern roots, a detail he'd never bothered to notice. "Business dinner at the plaza," he replied, scrolling through emails. "Don't wait up." As he disappeared into his study, Lisa allowed herself a moment of something she rarely indulged in: disappointment. She'd prepared his favorite meal, hoping tonight might be different. But David Wellington lived in a world where people like her existed only to serve, never to be seen. The storm that would change everything was already gathering outside, dark clouds swirling above the city like harbingers of transformation. Neither of them knew that within hours, the careful boundaries of their separate worlds would come crashing down, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable in ways they'd never imagined. Lisa finished her evening duties with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere. Tomorrow was her mother's birthday, and she'd saved for months to buy something special. The irony wasn't lost on her. She cleaned the homes of the wealthy, while her own family struggled to make ends meet in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn. As she gathered her things to leave, David's voice echoed from his study, sharp with frustration. His business dinner had been cancelled, another deal falling through. Lisa paused at the front door, her hand on the handle, fighting the urge to offer comfort to a man who'd never once asked how she was doing. The first drops of rain began to fall against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Lisa hurried toward the elevator, unaware that she was carrying David's keys in her purse. A simple mistake that would unravel both their carefully constructed lives. The storm hit New York like a living thing, wild and merciless. By 9 p.m., the rain hammered against windows with the fury of 1,000 drums, and lightning split the sky in brilliant, terrifying fragments. David stood in his study, watching the city disappear behind sheets of water when the lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across his penthouse as he realized the elevator was dead. No power meant no way down 43 floors, and his phone showed no signal. For the first time in years, David Wellington was truly trapped. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Lisa sat in her small apartment, David's keys heavy in her palm. She'd discovered them an hour ago, mixed with her own. The storm raged outside her window, and she knew the trains weren't running, but something, guilt, responsibility, or perhaps simple human decency, compelled her to brave the weather. The journey to Manhattan took 3 hours through flooded streets and subway delays. When she finally reached David's building, the doorman was gone, the lobby dark except for emergency lighting. She used her master key to reach the penthouse, her heart pounding with each floor. David heard the elevator's mechanical whir cutting through the storm's howl. His relief was quickly replaced by confusion when Lisa emerged, soaked to the bone, her usual composure shattered. "Or your keys," she said simply, holding them out. "You dropped them in the kitchen." For the first time in 3 years, David really looked at her. Water dripped from her dark hair, framing a face that was intelligent and determined. Her brown eyes held a strength he'd never noticed, and something else, a flicker of vulnerability she tried to hide. "You came out in this storm for keys." His voice carried genuine surprise. Lisa wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how she must look. "I thought you might need them." The power grid failure had knocked out most of Lower Manhattan. David's building was on emergency power only, and the elevators wouldn't run until morning. Lisa was as trapped as he was, and neither of them knew quite what to do with this unprecedented situation. "I should call a car," David said, though his phone remained stubbornly dead. "And the streets are flooded," Lisa replied quietly. "I barely made it here." They stood in the foyer, the storm raging outside, both acutely aware that their usual dynamic had shifted. David wasn't the untouchable employer anymore, and Lisa wasn't the invisible servant. They were just two people, isolated by circumstance, seeing each other clearly for the first time. "I'll take the guest room," Lisa said, starting to move away. "Wait," David's voice stopped her. "Are you hungry?" Lisa turned back, surprised by the question. In 3 years, he'd never asked about her needs, her feelings, her basic human requirements. Yes, actually." "Good," David said, feeling strangely nervous, "because I have no idea how to cook, and I'm starving." The admission hung between them, the first crack in David Wellington's perfect facade. Lisa almost smiled, catching herself before the expression could fully form. "I could make something," she offered carefully. "Not as the help," David said quickly, the words surprising them both. As someone who's stuck here too." Outside, thunder crashed like applause, as if the universe itself was celebrating this moment of unprecedented honesty between two people who'd spent 3 years invisible to each other. Lisa's apartment in Brooklyn was a world away from David's sterile penthouse, but as she moved through his kitchen with practiced ease, she transformed the cold space into something warm and inviting. The emergency lighting cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the storm outside provided a dramatic soundtrack to their unlikely evening. "I've never seen you cook," David said, leaning against the counter as Lisa worked. He'd shed his expensive suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "You've never watched me do anything," Lisa replied, her tone gentle but pointed. She was making pasta with ingredients from his well-stocked pantry, simple comfort food that felt revolutionary in this marble and steel environment. David absorbed the quiet rebuke, surprised by how much it stung. "You're right. I've been distant." Lisa looked up from stirring the sauce, one eyebrow raised. "Mr. Wellington, you've been invisible to me for 3 years. I could have been anyone." The honesty in her voice hit him like a physical blow. David had built his success on keeping people at arm's length, on maintaining control through emotional distance. But sitting here in his darkened kitchen, watching Lisa move with quiet confidence, he realized how much he'd missed. "Tell me about yourself," he said suddenly. Lisa's hand stilled on the spoon. "Sir?" "David. Just David, tonight." The name felt strange on his tongue, stripped of its usual authority. "And I want to know who you are." The pasta bubbled on the stove as Lisa considered his request. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the city. But inside the kitchen, something fragile and new was taking shape. "I'm from Atlanta, originally," she began carefully. "Moved here 5 years ago when my mother got sick. She needed better medical care than we could get back home." David found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. "What did you do before this?" "I have a degree in business administration from Emory," Lisa said, waiting for his reaction. "I worked for a consulting firm for 2 years before Mom got diagnosed with lupus. The treatments are expensive, and I needed flexible hours to care for her." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. The woman who'd been invisible to him for 3 years had a degree from one of the South's most prestigious universities. She'd sacrificed her career to care for her mother, taking a job that was beneath her education and abilities. "Lisa, he started, then stopped, unsure how to express the shame washing over him. "It's okay," she said quietly, serving the pasta onto 2 plates. "I chose this life. I chose to be invisible because it was easier than explaining myself to people who wouldn't understand anyway." They ate in companionable silence, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to their meal. David found himself studying Lisa's face in the flickering light, the way she savored each bite, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her posture despite everything she'd endured. "This is the best meal I've had in years," he said finally. Lisa smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask she wore during work hours. "It's just pasta." "No," David said seriously. "It's not just pasta. It's care. It's someone giving a damn about whether I'm fed or not." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. Lisa felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the wine David had opened. "Why do you live like this?" she asked suddenly, "in this beautiful, empty space, with no one to share it with?" David's fork paused halfway to his mouth, the question cut deeper than he'd expected, touching on wounds he'd spent years trying to ignore. "Because it's safer," he admitted. "Because caring about people means they can hurt you. And I've been hurt enough." Lisa set down her fork, her expression softening. "Who hurt you, David?" The use of his first name, spoken with such gentle concern, nearly undid him. David Wellington, master of the universe, felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble under the weight of Lisa's compassion. Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside the kitchen, 2 people continued their careful dance around truths they'd spent years avoiding. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across David's living room as he and Lisa settled onto the couch with glasses of wine. The storm had softened to a steady rain, and the city's usual cacophony was muted, creating an intimate cocoon around them. "You asked who hurt me," David said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Her name was Rebecca. We were engaged." Lisa listened without judgment, her presence steady and reassuring in the dim light. "She was everything my mother wanted in a daughter-in-law, wealthy, connected, beautiful. But she wasn't interested in me. She was interested in the Wellington name, the money, the status." David's voice grew bitter. "I found out she was cheating with my business partner. They'd been planning to take half my company in the divorce." "I'm sorry," Lisa said quietly. "That must have been devastating." "It was 5 years ago," David continued. "Well, I haven't let anyone close since then. It's easier to treat people like transactions. Clean, predictable, safe." Lisa studied his profile in the flickering light. "But also lonely. Terribly lonely," he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. The honesty in his voice broke something open in Lisa's chest. She'd spent 3 years seeing David as her cold, distant employer, never imagining the wounded man beneath the expensive suits and perfect composure. "I understand," she said softly. "I was engaged too. His name was Marcus, different Marcus from any you might know," she added with a slight smile. "He was a doctor, successful, everything I thought I wanted." David turned to face her fully, drawn by the pain in her voice. "When Mom got sick, he couldn't handle it, said he didn't sign up to be a caregiver, that I was choosing my family over our future." Lisa's hand tightened on her wineglass. "He left 2 weeks before the wedding. Said he couldn't marry someone who would always put other people first." "His loss," David said fiercely, surprising them both with his vehemence. Lisa looked at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "You don't even know me. I know you came out in a storm to bring me keys I didn't even know I'd lost," David said. "I know you've sacrificed your career to care for your mother. I know you've been working for a man who treated you like furniture, and you never complained, never made him feel small for it." The space between them on the couch seemed to shrink. Lisa felt the dangerous pull of attraction, the way David's voice had softened when he spoke about her sacrifices. "David," she said carefully. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening between us tonight, I know," he interrupted. "I know all the reasons why this is complicated. But I need you to know that I see you now, Lisa, really see you. And I'm sorry it took a storm to wake me up." She studied his face, searching for any sign of the superficial charm that wealthy men often use to get what they wanted. But David's expression was raw, vulnerable, stripped of pretense. "I've been invisible for so long," she whispered. "I forgot what it felt like to be seen." "You're not invisible," David said, reaching out to touch her hand. "Oh, you're the most real person I've met in years." The contact sent electricity through both of them. Lisa didn't pull away, and David didn't let go. They sat in the shadowy living room, hands linked, both terrified and exhilarated by the connection sparking between them. "This is crazy," Lisa said, but she didn't move away. "Completely insane," David agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Outside, the storm continued its retreat, but inside the penthouse, a different kind of tempest was just beginning. Two people who'd spent years protecting their hearts were discovering that some walls were meant to be torn down, that some risks were worth taking, even when you couldn't see where they'd lead. The city lights began to flicker back to life in the distance, but neither David nor Lisa noticed. They were too busy discovering each other, too caught up in the dangerous thrill of letting someone see past their carefully constructed defenses. Dawn broke over Manhattan with hesitant fingers of light, illuminating a city washed clean by the storm. David woke on the couch, a throw blanket tucked around his shoulders, and for a moment he wondered if the previous evening had been a dream. Then he smelled coffee and heard Lisa moving quietly in the kitchen, and the reality of what had happened, what was still happening, hit him with full force. They'd talked until nearly 3 in the morning, sharing stories, dreams and fears with the kind of honesty that only comes in the small hours when the world feels suspended between night and day. David had learned that Lisa wrote poetry in her spare time, that she'd once dreamed of opening her own consulting firm, that she made her mother laugh by doing terrible impressions of TV characters. Lisa had discovered that David played piano, but hadn't touched the keys in his penthouse for 2 years, that he'd wanted to be an architect before inheriting his father's business, that he sometimes stood on his balcony at night, wondering if anyone would notice if he just disappeared. Now, in the harsh light of morning, David felt exposed and vulnerable. He'd revealed more of himself in one night than he had in years, and the urge to retreat behind his familiar walls was overwhelming. "Good morning," Lisa said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She'd changed into one of his shirts, a simple white button-down that somehow looked better on her than any of his designer suits looked on him. "Morning," David replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," Lisa interrupted gently. "Besides, I've been making your coffee for 3 years. I know exactly how you like it." The reminder of their professional relationship hung between them like a third presence in the room. David felt the familiar urge to assert his authority, to re-establish the safe distance that had defined their interactions for so long. "Lisa, about last night." "I know," she said quietly, settling into the chair across from him. "I know you're scared." "I am too." Her directness caught him off guard. "This is complicated." "Everything worthwhile is complicated," Lisa replied, her dark eyes steady on his face. "The question is whether we're brave enough to figure it out." David studied her face, seeing the same uncertainty he felt reflected in her expression. But there was something else too, a quiet strength that drew him like a magnet. "I have a board meeting in 3 hours, he said finally. "And you have your life, your responsibilities." "I do," Lisa agreed. "But that doesn't mean last night didn't happen. It doesn't mean we can just go back to pretending we don't see each other." Before David could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. The power was back on throughout the city, and his schedule was packed with meetings to address the storm damage to various properties. "I should go," Lisa said, standing and smoothing down the borrowed shirt. "Let you get back to your life." "Lisa, wait." David stood too, catching her hand. "Have dinner with me. Tonight, not here, not as employer and employee, as two people who want to know each other better." Lisa's heart hammered against her ribs. "David, I don't think—" "Please," he said, and the vulnerability in his voice made her decision for her. "Okay," she whispered. But not some fancy restaurant where you'll be recognized, somewhere real." A smile tugged at the corner of David's mouth. "I'll leave the location up to you." As Lisa gathered her things and prepared to leave, both of them felt the weight of the line they were crossing. The storm had brought them together, but the real test would come in the bright light of day, when they had to decide whether what they'd found was worth the risk of heartbreak. David watched from his window as Lisa's figure disappeared into the morning crowd, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt genuinely hopeful about the future. The subway car rattled and swayed as David clung to the metal pole, trying to maintain his balance while surrounded by the evening rush-hour crowd. He'd taken the subway exactly 3 times in his adult life, and never wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Lisa had texted him an address in Brooklyn, a small Ethiopian restaurant she'd discovered during her early days in New York. David had wanted to send a car, but something in her message had made it clear this was a test. If he wanted to know her world, he had to enter it on its own terms. The restaurant was tiny, with maybe 15 tables and walls covered in vibrant tapestries. The air was thick with the scent of Berber spice and injera bread, and David felt conspicuously out of place among the families and couples sharing communal platters. Then he saw Lisa, and everything else faded away. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, and her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual professional style. When she smiled at him, David felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than attraction. "You made it," she said, standing to greet him. "I got lost twice," David admitted, and Lisa laughed. A real laugh that made several other diners turn to look. They ordered traditional dishes, eating with their hands from a shared platter as Lisa explained the customs and flavors. David was clumsy with the injera bread, and Lisa gently corrected his technique, her fingers brushing his as she showed him how to scoop the spiced lentils. "Tell me about your dreams," David said, as they shared honey wine. "Before everything got complicated." Lisa's expression grew distant. "I used to want to change the world. I thought I could help small businesses grow, create jobs in underserved communities. I had this whole 5-year plan mapped out. What happened to it?" "Life," Lisa said simply. "Mom got sick, and my priorities shifted. But sometimes I still think about it, having my own firm, making a real difference." David leaned forward, captivated by the passion in her voice. "What would you call it?" "Johnson Consulting," Lisa said with a self-deprecating smile. "Not very creative, I know." "It's perfect," David said seriously. "Strong, trustworthy, professional." Their conversation was interrupted by David's phone buzzing insistently. He glanced at the screen and saw his mother's name. Victoria Wellington rarely called unless she wanted something, and her timing was impeccable in its awfulness. "I should take this," David said apologetically, stepping outside. "David, darling," his mother's voice was sharp with disapproval. "Margaret Ashford saw you on the subway today." "The subway, David? What on earth were you thinking?" David closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of his family's expectations. "I was going to dinner, Mother." "With whom? Please tell me you're not seeing that dreadful Sinclair girl again. I thought we'd established that she was entirely unsuitable." "It's not Rebecca," David said quietly. "Then who?" "David, you know how important it is that you maintain certain standards." "The family name means nothing if I'm miserable," David interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. There was a long pause. "I'm coming over tomorrow. We need to discuss your recent behavior." The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone. When he returned to the table, Lisa took one look at his face and reached for her purse. "We should go," she said quietly. "No," David said firmly. "Oh, don't let my mother ruin this." "Your mother?" Lisa's expression shuttered. "She doesn't even know about me, and she's already disapproving." Lisa, please, what my mother thinks doesn't matter. It matters to you, Lisa said, standing. And it should. She's your family. David watched helplessly as Lisa paid the check, despite his protests. Outside the restaurant, the evening air was cool and filled with the sounds of the city. Traffic, laughter, life happening all around them. This was a mistake, Lisa said, hailing a taxi. No, David said, catching her arm. This was the first real evening I've had in years. Don't let my mother's poison touch it. Lisa looked at him with something that might have been pity. David, I've been the help for 3 years. I know how people like your mother see people like me. This, she gestured between them, this is a fantasy, and fantasies don't survive in the real world. The taxi pulled up, and Lisa got in without looking back. David stood on the sidewalk, watching her disappear into the Brooklyn night, feeling like he'd just lost something precious before he'd even had a chance to fully understand what it was. Victoria Wellington swept into David's penthouse like a force of nature, her designer heels clicking against the marble floors with military precision. At 58, she maintained the kind of artificial perfection that came from a lifetime of privilege and a personal army of cosmetic surgeons. David, she said, air-kissing his cheek while her sharp eyes catalogued every detail of his appearance. You look tired. Are you eating properly? I'm fine, Mother, David replied, already feeling the familiar tension that accompanied his mother's visits. Victoria settled herself on the white leather sofa, her gaze sweeping the room with the calculating precision of a general surveying a battlefield. I spoke to Margaret Ashford yesterday. She was quite concerned about your recent activities. My activities? The subway, darling. Really? What's next? Shopping at Target? Victoria's laugh was brittle as glass. I do hope you're not having some sort of midlife crisis. 32 is far too young for such dramatics. David poured himself a scotch, even though it was barely noon. I'm not having a crisis. I'm having a life. A life! Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. David, you have responsibilities. The Wellington name means something in this city. We have a reputation to maintain. What if I don't want to maintain it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's expression didn't change, but David saw the flash of calculation in her eyes. This is about a woman, she said finally. I can always tell. You get this ridiculous romantic look, just like your father did. David set down his glass carefully. What if it is? Then I hope she's someone suitable. The Morrison girl is back from Paris, and she's always been quite taken with you. Or perhaps it's not someone from our circle, David interrupted. Victoria went very still. I beg your pardon. Her name is Lisa. She works for me. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, disgust, and finally, cold fury. You're joking, she said finally. I'm not. David Wellington, you will not destroy this family's reputation for some servant girl who's obviously set her sights on your fortune. She's not. They're all the same. Victoria cut him off. These people see dollar signs when they look at men like you. She's probably been planning this for years, playing the innocent, waiting for her moment. You don't know her, David said, his voice dangerously quiet. I know her type, and I know you. You're lonely, you're vulnerable, and you're being manipulated by someone who's clearly very skilled at what she does. David stood up abruptly. That's enough. Is it? Tell me, David. What does she do for a living? What's her background? Her family? I'm willing to bet she's been very vague about her past. She has a degree from Emory, David said. And she's intelligent, hard-working, and she's sacrificed her career to care for her sick mother. Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, darling, a degree from Emory. How quaint. And the sick mother. Such a classic touch. I suppose she needs money for medical bills. You're disgusting, David said. I'm realistic, Victoria replied coolly, and I'm going to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. She opened her purse and withdrew a checkbook. How much do you think it would take? 50,000? 100? I find most people have a price. Get out, David said quietly. David, get out! The words exploded from him with such force that Victoria actually flinched. Get out of my home, and don't come back until you can speak about Lisa with respect. Victoria stood slowly, her face a mask of cold fury. You'll regret this, David. When she breaks your heart and takes half your fortune, remember this conversation. She swept toward the door, then paused. And David, if you think I'm going to stand by and watch you destroy everything your father built for some gold-digging nobody, you're very much mistaken. The door slammed behind her, leaving David alone with his anger and the terrible fear that his mother might be right. Not about Lisa being a gold digger, he knew better than that, but about the impossibility of bridging the gap between their worlds. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside the penthouse, David felt the walls closing in. He'd stood up to his mother, but the victory felt hollow, because the real test wasn't whether he could defy Victoria Wellington, it was whether he could convince Lisa that their love was worth fighting for. Lisa stared at the envelope that had been slipped under her apartment door, her hands trembling as she read the return address, Wellington Holdings. Inside was a check for $100,000 and a note written in elegant script. For services rendered and future considerations, I trust this will be sufficient to relocate and find new employment. V. Wellington. The check fluttered to the floor as Lisa sank into her kitchen chair, her chest tight with humiliation and rage. She'd known this would happen, had prepared herself for it, but the reality of being bought off like a common blackmailer still cut deep. Her phone rang, David's name flashing on the screen, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. What would she say? That his mother had offered her money to disappear, that she was seriously considering taking it. The truth was, $100,000 would change everything. Her mother's medical bills would be covered, they could move to a better apartment, and Lisa could finally pursue her dream of starting her own consulting firm. It was everything she'd worked for, handed to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was break David's heart. "Lisa!" Her mother's voice called from the bedroom. Was that the phone? "Just a wrong number, Mama," Lisa called back, quickly hiding the check. Rosa Johnson appeared in the doorway, her once vibrant frame now fragile from years of illness. But her eyes were still sharp, and she immediately noticed her daughter's distress. "What's wrong, baby?" Lisa forced a smile. "Nothing, Mama. Just tired." Rosa studied her for a long moment, then settled into the chair across from her. "Oh, you know, when I was your age, I thought love was supposed to be easy. Your father and I, we had our struggles, but I always thought the love part should be simple." "Mama, I was wrong," Rosa continued. "Real love is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's scary and messy, and it asks you to be braver than you ever thought possible." Lisa felt tears prick her eyes. What if the person you love is from a different world? What if loving them means hurting other people? Then you have to decide what kind of person you want to be, Rosa said gently. The kind who runs from love because it's complicated, or the kind who fights for it? Before Lisa could respond, there was a knock at the door. Lisa's heart jumped. Had David somehow found her address? But when she opened it, she found a delivery man with an enormous bouquet of flowers. "Lisa Johnson?" he asked. "Yes," she said, accepting the roses with confusion. The card was simple. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" D. Lisa buried her face in the flowers, breathing in their sweet scent. Despite everything, his mother's interference, the impossible complications of their situation, David was still trying, still fighting for whatever was growing between them. "Who sent those?" Rosa asked with a knowing smile. "Someone who probably shouldn't have," Lisa replied, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "I know my mother contacted you. Whatever she said, whatever she offered, please don't let her poison what we have. You're worth fighting for." Lisa's thumb hovered over the keyboard, her heart at war with her head. Taking Victoria's money would solve all her problems, but it would also destroy any chance of happiness with David. And despite her fears, Despite the obvious obstacles, she couldn't deny that what they'd shared was real. She thought about the way David had looked at her during their dinner, the vulnerability in his voice when he talked about his loneliness, the gentle way he'd touched her hand. That wasn't the behavior of a man playing games or looking for a temporary distraction. "Mama," Lisa said suddenly, "what would you do if someone offered you everything you needed, but taking it meant giving up everything you wanted?" Rosa's eyes were warm with understanding. "I'd ask myself which choice I could live with, and then I'd be brave enough to follow my heart." Lisa nodded, her decision crystallizing. She picked up Victoria's check, tore it into pieces, and threw it in the trash. Then she grabbed her phone and typed a response to David. "Your place. 1 hour. We need to talk." As she prepared to leave, Rosa caught her hand. "Lisa, whatever happens, I'm proud of you. Your father would be too." Lisa squeezed her mother's hand, drawing strength from the woman who taught her that love was worth fighting for, even when the odds were stacked against you. David paced his penthouse like a caged animal, checking his watch every few minutes. Lisa's text had been cryptic, but the fact that she'd agreed to come at all felt like a victory. He'd spent the past hour rehearsing what he'd say, how he'd convince her that they could make this work despite his mother's interference. When the elevator doors opened, David's breath caught. Lisa stood there in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, looking simultaneously vulnerable and determined. In her hand was a manila envelope. "Thank you for coming," David said, moving toward her. "Don't thank me yet," Lisa replied, her voice carefully neutral. "We need to talk about what happened." David gestured toward the living room, and they sat on opposite ends of the couch. The same couch where they'd shared wine and stories just days before. Now it felt like a chasm separated them. "My mother had no right," David began. "Your mother did exactly what I expected her to do," Lisa interrupted. "She tried to buy me off." David's jaw tightened. "How much?" $100,000. Lisa pulled the torn check from the envelope, letting the pieces fall onto the coffee table between them. "I turned it down." David stared at the shredded paper, emotion clogging his throat. "Lisa, but I understand why she did it," Lisa continued. "And I understand why you might think she was right. I don't— Look at us, David." Lisa's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Really look at us. You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I clean houses for a living. Your family has been part of New York society for generations. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," David said fiercely, moving closer to her. "You're everything." "I'm a complication," Lisa whispered. "I'm someone who will make your life harder, who will cost you relationships with your family, who will never fit into your world." David reached for her hands, and this time she didn't pull away. "What if I don't want that world anymore? What if I want to build something new, something real with you?" Lisa searched his face, looking for any sign that he was caught up in romantic fantasy rather than facing reality. "David, your mother will never accept me. Your friends, your business associates, they'll never see me as anything but the help who got above her station. Then we'll find new friends," David said simply. "Lisa, I've spent my entire life living by other people's expectations, trapped in a golden cage of tradition and social obligation. But with you, I feel free. I feel like myself for the first time in years." "And what happens when that feeling fades?" Lisa asked, voicing her deepest fear. What happens when the novelty wears off and you realize what you've given up?" David was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. When he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. 3 days ago, I would have agreed with you. I would have said it was impossible, that the differences between us were too great. But then I got to know you, really know you, and I realized something." He stood and walked to his piano, running his fingers over the keys he hadn't touched in 2 years. "I stopped playing because it reminded me of being happy, and I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve happiness. But last night, after our dinner, I came home and played for 3 hours. For the first time in years, I felt alive." Lisa watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You asked what happens when the novelty fades," David continued, turning back to her. "But this isn't novelty, Lisa. This is recognition. This is coming home to myself." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking you to take a chance on us, to let me prove that what we have is worth fighting for." Lisa felt the last of her defenses crumbling. "Your mother will make our lives hell." "Probably," David agreed with a rueful smile. "But I'd rather have hell with you than heaven without you." The words hung between them, simple and true. Lisa thought of her mother's advice, of the choice between safety and love, between what was expected and what was possible. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," David admitted, terrified. "But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of fighting for you." Lisa looked into his eyes and saw not the cold, distant employer she'd known for 3 years, but a man who was willing to risk everything for love, a man who saw her not as the help or as a project to be fixed, but as an equal partner in building something beautiful. "Okay," she said softly. Okay, let's try. Let's see if we're brave enough to make this work." David's face broke into a smile that transformed him completely. He pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it tasted like promises and new beginnings and the kind of love that changes everything. 6 months later, Lisa stood in the conference room of Johnson Consulting, looking out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The office wasn't in the most prestigious building, that would come later, but it was hers. The brass nameplate on her desk still made her smile every time she saw it. Lisa Johnson, CEO. "The Mitchell Group just confirmed," David said, entering the room with 2 cups of coffee and a stack of contracts. They want to move forward with the community development project." Lisa accepted the coffee gratefully, marveling at how natural it felt to have David as her business partner. He'd left Wellington Holdings 3 months ago, shocking the real estate world and causing his mother to threaten disinheritance. But David seemed lighter now, happier, as if he'd finally found his purpose. "That's the 5th new client this month," Lisa said, reviewing the contracts. "At this rate, we'll need to hire more staff by Christmas." "I have some ideas about that," David said with a grin. "What would you say to opening a second office in Atlanta? There's a lot of opportunity in the Southeast for the kind of work we're doing." Lisa's eyes lit up. Johnson Consulting specialized in helping small businesses in underserved communities grow and thrive. Exactly the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing when she'd first graduated from college. David's real estate expertise and connections, combined with her business acumen and passion for community development, had proven to be a powerful combination. "I'd say yes," Lisa replied, "but only if you're sure you won't miss the penthouse lifestyle." David laughed, gesturing around the modest office with its second-hand furniture and potted plants Lisa had insisted on bringing from home. "This is better than any penthouse. This has purpose." Their relationship had weathered the storms Lisa had feared. Victoria Wellington had indeed made good on her threats, cutting David off financially and socially, shunning both of them. Several of David's former friends had followed suit, unable to understand his choice to throw away his inheritance for the help. But others had surprised them. David's college roommate had become one of their first investors. 2 of his former business associates had quietly reached out, expressing admiration for his courage, and slowly, carefully, they'd built a new circle of friends based on shared values rather than shared bank accounts. "Speaking of purpose," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something for you." Lisa's heart skipped as he pulled out a small velvet box. "David, before you panic," he said quickly, "this isn't a ring. Not yet. I know we agreed to take things slow." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a key. "It's the key to our first office. I had it made into a necklace. I wanted you to have something to remind you of how far you've come." Lisa felt tears prick her eyes as David fastened the necklace around her throat. The key felt warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of the dreams she'd almost given up on. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect," David replied, his arms encircling her waist. "And when you're ready, when we're both ready, I'll have a different question to ask you." Lisa smiled, thinking of the ring she'd glimpsed in David's desk drawer the week before. He thought he was being subtle, but she'd learned to read him well over the past 6 months. The thought of marrying him still scared her sometimes, but it was a good kind of fear, the kind that came from knowing your life was about to change in wonderful ways. A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. Lisa's assistant poked her head in, trying not to smile at finding her boss in her boyfriend's arms. "Ms. Johnson, your 3 o'clock is here. The documentary crew from Channel 7. "Right," Lisa said, smoothing her hair and straightening her blazer. "Send them in." The news crew was doing a feature on successful small businesses started by women of color. Lisa had been reluctant to do the interview at first, but David had convinced her that their story might inspire others to take similar leaps of faith. As the cameras rolled, and Lisa talked about her journey from house cleaner to CEO, David watched from the back of the room with undisguised pride. 6 months ago, he'd been a lonely, bitter man trapped in a life that felt like an expensive prison. Now he was building something meaningful with the woman he loved, and every day brought new possibilities. The interviewer asked about the challenges of starting a business, about the risks involved in leaving security behind for an uncertain future. "Fear is just information," Lisa said, her eyes finding David's across the room. "It tells you that something matters enough to be scared about. The question isn't whether you'll be afraid, it's whether you'll be brave enough to act despite the fear." After the crew left, David and Lisa stood on the small balcony outside their office, watching the sun set over the city that had brought them together. "Any regrets?" Lisa asked, leaning against the railing. David considered the question seriously. He'd lost his mother's approval, his inheritance, and most of his old life, but he'd gained something infinitely more valuable, a sense of purpose, a partnership built on love and mutual respect, and the knowledge that he was finally living authentically. "Only one," he said finally. Lisa's heart clenched. "What?" "I regret that it took me 3 years to really see you," David said, pulling her close. "But I wasted so much time." Lisa relaxed against him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the crisp autumn air. "We found each other when we were supposed to. Everything that happened before was just preparation." As if on cue, Lisa's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw you on the news, baby. Your father would be so proud. We both love you." Lisa showed David the message, and he smiled. Rosa Johnson had become one of David's biggest supporters, often joining them for Sunday dinners and regaling him with embarrassing stories about Lisa's childhood. She'd also become the unofficial office manager for Johnson Consulting, her sharp business sense and warm personality making her indispensable to their growing team. "Your mum's working late again tonight," David observed. "She loves having a purpose again," Lisa said. "And almost as much as I love having her healthy." Rosa's medical treatments were now fully covered by the company's excellent health insurance plan, and her condition had stabilized dramatically. The stress reduction of financial security had worked wonders for her overall health. "So," David said, wrapping his arms around Lisa from behind, "what do you say we go home and I make you dinner? I've been practicing." Lisa laughed, remembering David's early attempts at cooking. "Will the fire department need to be involved?" "Hey, I've gotten much better. I only set off the smoke alarm twice last week." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave their office, their dream made manifest, Lisa caught sight of the key pendant around her neck in the window's reflection. It gleamed gold against her throat, a reminder of doors opening, of chances taken, of love found in the most unexpected places. The storm that had brought them together had passed months ago, but the changes it had wrought in their lives continued to ripple outward like waves. They'd learned that love wasn't just about finding the right person. It was about being brave enough to become the right person for each other. Hand in hand, they walked toward the elevator, toward home, toward a future they were building together, one choice at a time. Outside, the city pulsed with life and possibility, and somewhere in its vast expanse, other people were taking similar leaps of faith, choosing love over fear, hope over cynicism, connection over isolation. David squeezed Lisa's hand as the elevator doors closed, and she squeezed back, a silent promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The woman who had once been invisible had become the most important person in his world, and the man who had once been unreachable had become her partner in every sense of the word. Their story was just beginning. The end. 5 years later, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the sprawling Victorian house in Park Slope, casting golden shadows across the hardwood floors that Lisa had insisted on refinishing herself. The sound of laughter echoed from the backyard, where David was attempting to assemble a swing set while their 3-year-old daughter, Maya, offered very serious supervision. "Daddy, that piece goes the other way," Maya announced with the confidence only toddlers possessed. "Are you sure, Princess?" David asked, wiping sweat from his brow as he squinted at the instruction manual. "I'm sure. Mommy's smarter than you, and she said so." Lisa laughed from the kitchen window, where she was preparing dinner for the small celebration they'd planned. Tomorrow marked the 5th anniversary of Johnson Consulting, and tonight they were hosting the team that had helped build their dream into a thriving reality. Johnson Consulting now had offices in 3 cities and employed 47 people. They'd helped launch over 200 small businesses, created thousands of jobs, and had been featured in Forbes as one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the Northeast. But Lisa's proudest achievement was the scholarship fund they'd established at Emory University for first-generation college students from underserved communities. The front door chimed, and Rosa's voice called out, "Where's my grandbaby?" "Grandma Rosa!" Maya shrieked, abandoning her supervisory duties to race toward the house. Rosa Johnson, now 68 and healthier than she'd been in years, scooped Maya into her arms with practiced ease. At Lisa's insistence, Rosa had officially retired from her role as office manager the previous year, though she still came in twice a week to keep everyone honest, as she put it. "How's my favorite CEO doing?" Rosa asked, kissing Lisa's cheek. "Tired, happy, grateful," Lisa replied, stirring the sauce for the pasta, "the usual." "And nervous," Rosa added with a knowing smile. Lisa's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. They hadn't told anyone yet about the pregnancy. She was only 8 weeks along, but Rosa had an uncanny ability to sense these things. "And how did you've been drinking ginger tea all week, and you had that same glow when you were carrying Maya," Rosa said. "Does David know?" "I'm telling him tonight, after everyone leaves." Lisa bit her lip. "We weren't exactly trying, but we weren't exactly not trying either." "Honey, the best things in life are rarely planned," Rosa said, thinking of her own unexpected journey from Atlanta to New York, from loss to healing, that they just happen when you're brave enough to embrace them. More guests began arriving: David's college friend Robert and his wife, several employees from the consulting firm, and Lisa's best friend Carmen, who'd driven up from Atlanta for the celebration. Conspicuously absent was Victoria Wellington, who had maintained her stubborn silence for 5 years, missing Maya's birth, their wedding, and every milestone that might have brought joy to her rigid life. David had grieved the loss of his mother's approval, but he'd found family in unexpected places. Rosa had become the mother-in-law he'd never imagined having, and Maya had surrounded them both with the kind of unconditional love that made other losses feel manageable. As the evening progressed, David found himself watching Lisa move through their home with quiet satisfaction. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and the gold key necklace he'd given her years ago still hung around her throat, now accompanied by the wedding ring that had belonged to Rosa's mother. Their wedding had been small and perfect, held in Rosa's church in Atlanta with 50 of their closest friends and family. David had cried when Lisa walked down the aisle, and Lisa had laughed through her tears when Maya, then 2, had announced loudly that Mommy looks pretty like a princess. "Penny for your thoughts," Lisa said, appearing at his elbow with a glass of wine. "Just thinking about how different life is from what I planned," David replied, pulling her close. "Better or worse?" "Immeasurably better." He kissed her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Though I have to say, 5 years ago I never imagined I'd be the kind of man who gets emotional about swing sets." "You cried when Maya took her first steps too," Lisa reminded him with a grin. "That was different. That was a major milestone." "And this isn't." David considered this, watching through the window as Maya played with the neighborhood children in their backyard. The swing set stood completed, somewhat crooked, but sturdy, a testament to his determination to give his daughter everything he'd never had: stability, unconditional love, and parents who chose each other every single day. "You're right," he said finally. "Everything's a milestone when you're paying attention." As the party wound down and the last guests departed, David and Lisa found themselves alone on their front porch, Maya finally asleep upstairs after an evening of being thoroughly spoiled by her extended chosen family. "I have something to tell you," Lisa said, settling into the porch swing David had installed the previous summer. "Turn if it's about the quarterly reports. Can it wait until tomorrow?" David asked, joining her on the swing. "I'm officially off duty." "It's not about work." Lisa took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "David, we're going to have another baby." The swing stopped moving. David stared at her, his expression cycling through surprise, joy, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." "About 10 weeks along, according to the doctor." 10 weeks. David's voice cracked slightly. "Lisa, that's amazing. That's wonderful. That's terrifying," Lisa supplied. "Completely terrifying," David agreed, then broke into a grin that transformed his entire face. "And perfect, absolutely perfect." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their relationship from that first storm-swept evening years ago. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. "Maya's going to be over the moon," David said, his hand resting protectively over Lisa's stomach. "She's been asking for a little brother or sister for months," Lisa agreed, "although she's convinced it's going to be a puppy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance in their front yard, while the sounds of the city provided a gentle soundtrack to their contentment. Lisa thought about the scared, invisible woman she'd been 5 years ago, working for a man who barely acknowledged her existence. That woman could never have imagined this life, this house, this family, this sense of belonging and purpose. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if there hadn't been a storm that night?" she asked. David considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe it would have happened differently, but I think we were always meant to be here. In Park Slope with a crooked swing set and a 3-year-old who thinks she knows everything." "Exactly here," David confirmed. "With you, with Maya, with this beautiful, chaotic, imperfect life we've built together." A light rain began to fall, gentle drops that reminded them both of that first storm that had brought them together. But instead of running inside, they stayed on the porch, protected by the overhang David had insisted on installing. "I love you, Lisa Wellington," David said, using her married name with the same reverence he might reserve for a prayer. "I love you too, David Wellington," she replied, marveling, as she always did, at how perfectly their names sounded together. As they finally headed inside, Lisa caught sight of their reflection in the front window. A couple in love, a family building something lasting and true. The key pendant caught the porch light, glinting gold against her throat, and she smiled at the reminder of how far they'd traveled from that storm-swept evening when everything changed. Upstairs, Maya slept peacefully in her princess-themed bedroom, dreaming of swing sets and baby siblings and the kind of unconditional love that would follow her throughout her life. And in the master bedroom, David and Lisa fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for the storm that had blown away their old lives and made room for something infinitely better. Outside, the gentle rain continued to fall, washing the city clean and preparing it for whatever new beginnings tomorrow might bring. And in a beautiful house in Brooklyn, a family slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that love, real, lasting, transformative love, was worth every risk they'd taken to find it. Some storms destroy everything in their path, but the best storms, the ones that matter, clear away what's no longer serving you and make space for what's meant to be. David and Lisa had learned that lesson well, and they'd spent 5 years building a life worthy of the love that had brought them together. Their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning the next chapter, with new challenges, new joys, and new opportunities to choose each other every single day, because that's what real love is. Not a single moment of recognition, but a lifetime of daily choices to build something beautiful together, one decision at a time. The end. Thanks for watching to the end. Did you like the story? Tell us what you thought in the comments below. We want to know what you think. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe now for more exciting stories you won't want to miss. Activate the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. See you in the next story. See you there.